I'm just forging straight ahead now. So page 162. Quick reminder, we've been discussing the length, the duration of twilight, how long twilight might be. That's coming from my computer, so ignore that. Doesn't seem to be important. So the duration of twilight and a bunch of different suggestions about it, and we just ended. Now, the duration of twilight is important for the rabbis for only one reason, for halachic reasons, because you need to know when one day starts and another day ends, and one day stops and another day begins. Mostly for the rules of Shabbat, when does Shabbat start, but for all sorts of reasons. We also had, for the purposes of being impure, how long are you impure? Anyway, so we just had a comment from two rabbis, actually a disagreement. Of course, there's all sorts of opinions about how long twilight might be. So the last one we just read is one rabbi says it's 2/3 of a mile. And if you remember, they use sometimes distance instead of time units because they don't have time units really. So all they have is distance units, how long it takes a person to walk 2/3 of a mile. Another rabbi says, no, it's not 2/3 of a mile, it's 3/4 of a mile. So neither of them really justify their opinion, but they come up with 2/3, 3/4. Steinsaltz, by the way, spends time trying to justify their opinions, trying to find verses, but I'm not going to spend time on that right now. But the reason I'm mentioning this is because it leads into the next discussion, and I'll ask this again. It was a math quiz that I ended with last time. Which number is bigger, 2/3 or 3/4?
3/4.
3/4. It was way too much hesitation there. Yes, 3/4 is bigger. Yeah. So the reason that's important is because one rabbi thinks twilight is longer than the other. 3/4 means that it's a longer period of time than 2/3. So keep that in mind as we go on. Page 162, the second paragraph. This is quite interesting, and you get a little thrown off here by the English translation, I'll tell you. So that's so I'll try to help you with that. The chilufa b'chalta. Okay, the rabbis their positions are reversed when it comes to something called a chalta. A chalta, and he translates that. Steinsaltz translates that as a wicker vessel. So, but when he's using the word vessel in English, he's referring to a Hebrew word that means kli. So a kli means like a dish or a kitchen vessel, as opposed to, in our contemporary English, a vessel can also mean a boat, right? But he doesn't mean a boat. In fact, when he uses the word vessel there, in fact, he means the opposite of a boat. So I'll explain two quick things. First of all, when they say the chilufa, the rabbis, there are whole opposite opinions here. They mean opposite. So in one case, one rabbi thinks that twilight is a longer period of time than the other. Now, when it comes to defining what they have here is a chalta is a floating vessel, but not a boat, a floating kli. It's a floating basket, or a floating, small kitchen item, but it floats. Now, why does it float? I'll tell you that in a second, because you can carry things in it that way. Right. But so they have different opinions here because they have to define. So they have to define what is it that makes this small vessel, which is not a boat, what makes it a boat? Now it's going to be size. Okay, so why does this matter? Because you can carry it on Shabbat. You carry it by kind of helping it down the waves, down the river. Let's say there's a river. You can carry it on Shabbat if it's small. If it's big, if it's too big, it becomes a boat, and you're not allowed to move a boat on Shabbat at all. Okay? All this, by the way, is Eruv, no Eruv, doesn't matter. Even if there's an Eruv. Even if there's an Eruv, you still can't move a boat. Because that's sort of transportation. It's a whole different area of labor on Shabbat, okay? But something that's small, that's actually just like a basket, like a fruit basket, and you got fruit inside of it, you can actually move that along the waves on Shabbat. So what we have to define is how big is that thing? When does it become a boat? And when is it just like a little kitchen item, okay?
2/3 of a mile.
Yeah, they're going to have to use, that's not going to work here because we're talking about volume. So how big is it? We get all sorts of discussions about what are units of volume. Okay, so in this case, the only reason they bring this up is in this case, one rabbi says bigger and one rabbi says smaller, whereas it came to defining twilight, one said smaller and one said bigger. Okay, so now I'm going to go on and we'll have this discussion. Damar Rabbah. So Rabbah says, Chalta bat trei kure. So Rabbah has a very simple opinion. A chalta, which is this floating wicker basket, is 2. Trei is 2. It's unlike Spanish, unos, dos, tres, right? In Spanish, it's 3. But tre means 2 in Aramaic. Remember the Chadgadya? Bi tre zuzah? You bought it with 2 zuz. So tre means 2. It's 2 cores. Core is a unit of measure, a volume. Okay, that's it. He's got the answer, okay? It's 2, no bigger. If it's bigger than that, it becomes a boat, and you can't carry it on Shabbat. Sari l'taltaluha. So then you can use it, and you can carry it on Shabbat. Uvatlata kure, but if it's 3, asur l'taltaluha. You can't carry it on Shabbat. So it's 2, you can carry it. 3, you cannot. 3, it becomes a boat, and you can't carry it. What he doesn't go into right now, what if it's 2.2, 2.3, or what's, he just says, yeah, but it seems like he said, well, they did know about fractions, but he seems to be saying that 2 is the maximum. If it's 2, then you can carry it. If it's 3, it's not as a boat. Okay. Rav Yosef, these were the same guys that were arguing about twilight. Now, by the way, they argued about everything. They were study partners, which means they argued about everything. So Rav Yosef have a different opinion. He says batlata kore, says if it's 3, he has a bigger number. If it's 3, nami shari, in that case you are allowed to carry it. So 3 you are allowed to carry it, but arba kore asur. But if it's 4, then it becomes something else. It's not a chalta anymore. It's a boat. And once it's a boat, then you can't carry it. Okay? Is all this clear? Okay. Well, this is going much faster than I thought.
They differ by 1 core.
They differ by 1 core? Excellent math. That's right. That's exactly right. Okay. Now, all right. But we're not done. All right, so that's the difference of opinion. By the way, it doesn't tell you who's right, who's wrong, right? Because the Talmud very often is not interested in that. It's just interested in collecting the opinions and having later people think about what might be right, what might be wrong. They're interested in the parameters and how you get there and the discussion of what the law might mean. Okay, so we're going to go on now. Amar Abaye, Baimine Demar Bishat Maseh. So Abaye says, I asked my teacher at the exact time I was about to do it. So it's one thing for the halakha to be in the abstract, theoretical, but Abaye's got, a boat, or not a boat. He's got this vessel he wants to move. It's Shabbat, so he asks his teacher, am I allowed to move it or not? Okay? V'afilu batre kore lo shrali. And he said, and even one that was 2. So the 2 is the smaller amount. He said even one that was 2 cores, whatever core means, it's a small unit. Even when it was 2, he didn't let me do it. Okay, so the 2, the 3, so for his, doesn't say who his teacher was that asked him, but presumably it was Rabbi, because Rabbi was Abaye's teacher. So that's interesting. All right. Kiman, so who was he ruling like? So he was like Haitana, like an earlier rabbi, Ditnan, as it says in a Mishnah. Kaveret Akash, there's a Kaveret Akash is a round straw barrel. Okay? Kaveret is also an Israeli rock group. It's also the Hebrew word for hive, like a beehive. Okay, but it's a collection of stuff. Why is it a beehive? Because that's what a beehive is. Bees collect a collection of stuff and they put it together. Kaveret akash, a collection of, kash is straw. Okay, so that becomes a round straw barrel because you're pushing the straw together. Okay, kaveret akash, vikaveret akanim, and also a collection of reeds. Ubor sfina Alexandrite, okay, and also an Alexandrian ship. All these things, okay? Afal pishi yesh lahem shulaim, even though they have a bottom. So bottom means that they can float. Vehein machzikot arba'a sa'abalach, and they can hold 4 sellas of liquid. That's what balach means, okay? Shehein koraim beyavesh. So 4 cores of liquid would be the equivalent of 2 cores of dry goods. Everybody understand that too? Any container can hold more liquid than dry goods because, and this of course depends on the dry goods, but they're on average because for dry goods there's room in between that you can't fill in, so it's always liquid. So they're saying 4 of liquid is going to equal 2 of dry goods, okay? Tihorim, okay? They are pure, so they become ritually impure. All right, so what does all this mean? Because there's 2 halacha categories here. One we just talked about is what makes something too big to carry on Shabbat. There's a whole other halacha category. What makes something so big that it doesn't acquire ritual impurity? Okay, so now here's something that makes sense to everybody. Let's say you have a frying pan, and a bug falls in the frying pan. Okay? Does the frying pan at that point become impure, meaning actually unkosher? There's an unkosher thing. Let's say it's an unkosher bug. There are kosher bugs, but most bugs are unkosher. Let's assume it's a not kosher bug. It's about that big, like a beetle. A beetle's in your frying pan. Do you feel like at that point you need to kosher the frying pan?
Depends on the size.
Okay, it depends on the size. Let's say an average size frying pan. No, the answer is yes. The answer is yes. The answer is just like you cook some bacon in there. So you have to kosher the frying pan. A bug falls in it. The bug's not kosher. You have to kosher the frying pan. Okay, let's say you have a storehouse in your back where you keep stuff, and a beetle's in there or roaches in there. Does it acquire impurity when it's in there? Yes or no? What do you think? So the answer is no. I mean, of course, there's going to be bugs and beetles in storehouses. Well, what's the difference? I mean, technically, you may be eating off of one or the other. You put stuff on the floor. So there really is no difference, right? Except for size. Size. That's it. The only distinction is size. So there could presumably be a frying pan that is so big that it wouldn't acquire. So there are certain receptacles that don't acquire impurity for our purposes, that don't become treif. Okay. So and if that's the case, they're big. And if they're that big, you also can't carry them on Shabbat. Cannot carry them on Shabbat, even if there's an Eruv, by the way. This whole discussion it also occurs in the Talmudic tractate Eruvin, which is about Eruvs. And the Eruv also, so you put up an Eruv, does that mean you can carry anything? Can you tow your car? On an Eruv? Can you drive if there's that would be the issue. Sure. So the Talmud comes up with there are certain things that are too big to carry on Shabbat, even if there's an Eruv, because that's really labor. But an ordinary house vessel, like a wicker basket, frying pan, stuff like that, that's permissible if there's an Eruv. Okay, so he's explaining to him how and so for this teacher, we don't know his name yet, but the teacher that's instructing Abai what to do says, I figure it out from the discussion about purity and impurity. If a thing is too big to acquire impurity, at that point it's too big to carry on Shabbat. Because at that point it becomes a boat, a car, a container, and those are things you don't have to kosher. You don't have to, right? Because they're just too big. Now, that's not the only way of looking at it, by the way. So it's not the only way of looking at whether something acquires impurity but it's a logical way of looking at it, I have to say. All right. Amar Abaye. So Abaye says, Shema minas. Rabbi is saying, well, I learned something from this, but he said one thing important that I learned is, and you may have noticed it too, ha gucha tilta have. Says I've also learned the proper dimensions, the difference between how much dry goods a place can carry, halachically. It says how much dry goods a thing can carry, and also how much damp stuff a thing can carry. So we've learned that too. I've schlepped in a little bit of learning. I learned what I wanted to know, which is that I can't carry this thing, but I also learned from a halachic point of view, a unit of measurement, that when you're measuring something, there's a certain amount of dry goods, more liquids than dry goods something can carry. Okay, any questions? Okay, we'll continue. Abaye chaze l'Rava, deka dave l'marav. So Abaye was watching Rava, and he saw that he was gazing at the west when the sun was setting, by the way. Okay, if you recall, one of the definitions of twilight was the color of the sky. Anybody remember, was it the eastern sky or the western sky? It was the eastern sky. Now, does the sun set in the east or the west? Yeah, the sun sets in the west, so it's a little odd. You would think you would be looking at the sun setting to determine whether it's twilight or not. In fact, you look the opposite way. Okay, so Abai noticed Rave was staring into the western sky at twilight. Why was he doing that? Now, right, because it's pretty. Right.
It's probably longer it takes longer to be dark or to make it.
That's where the stars first make it.
Yeah, well, there's all sorts of reasons. One thing is purely aesthetic. You're looking at the sunset. Now, of course, for the Talmud, that wouldn't be interesting at all. Like you don't. We're trying to figure out the law here. So if you're trying to figure out the law, why are you looking at the western sky? Look, you can enjoy sunsets on your own time, but here in the Talmud, we're trying to figure out the law. So that confuses Abaye. Amarle, V'hatanya. So he reminds them of the teaching. So Abaye says to him, V'hatanya. I mean, maybe you expect Abaye to say, hey. I mean, Rav would just say, hey, I'm just looking at the sunset. Leave me alone. But that's not what he says. So he reminds them of this teaching. V'hatanya, Kolzman Shipnei Mizrach Madimim. He reminds them of the teaching. If you want to figure out when, by the way, so you might be trying to figure out, if you want to figure out when Shabbat starts, so you figure out twilight, it says in the teaching, you look in the eastern skies, when the eastern sky is red. Okay, Amarle, so he answers him back. Misavart pnei mizrach mamash. He says, are you actually reading that teaching literally? That it's actually the eastern sky, mamash? Literally the eastern sky? That's it. That's interesting because that's certainly how I would have read it. It says the eastern sky. Yes, I'm reading that literally.
Right.
So now, Rava is throwing this new wrinkle into it. It doesn't actually mean it literally. Well, what else would it mean? Let's read. Lo panim hamadimim et mizrach. It doesn't mean the eastern sky. It's the west that's causing the eastern sky. So in other words, to actually see what's causing the eastern sky to become red, you have to look at the west. Okay. And by the way, in a weird way, and it's a weird definition of it. I'm not sure I quite understand it. So it's well, obviously it's the sun that creates the pink in the east. So he's saying I have to look at the sun in order to determine if it's going to create the pink in the east. So the only way you do it is you look at, and that becomes the halacha.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. If you want to know what twilight is, you're actually supposed to look at the sunset. Even the teaching itself, the Braita itself says look at the east. Anyway, yeah. Anyway, Ikad. All right. So it's Ikad Amre. Now this Ikad Amre means there's people that tell the story in a flipped way, where the characters are flipped. So Ikad Amre Rava Chayze la'Abaye dekad Ave Mizrach. And in another version of the story, it was Rava that saw Abaye looking at the sky and then corrected him. Amarle Misavar Pnei Mizrach Mamash. And he said back to him, did you think that when it said the eastern sky, it meant it literally? Panim madimim et Mizrach. It's the sun that is causing the eastern sky to be pink. So therefore you have to look at the western sky. Okay? And then that becomes the halakha. It doesn't matter which rabbi. So in the other version of it, the other rabbi's talking to the other one. It's about the sunset. V'simanech kavta. And the way you remember this, so it's interesting because if you're just reading the Mishnah, you might think, how do I figure out when it's twilight? I have to look at the eastern sky. So it says it's like when you look at a window and you're trying to determine when the sun is setting, and you want to know when it's going to be light in your house because the sun comes through the window. So you don't actually look at the wall behind. You look at the sun, even though what really matters is the light in the house. So when you want to figure out if it's light or not in your house, for whatever reason, you don't look at the wall, even though it's the wall, it tells you whether it's light or not. You look directly at the sun to figure it out. Okay? So that's what they said. So if you want to figure out if it's twilight, don't look in the east, even though that's what really matters. You really should look at the west, at the sun, and see, is the sun now causing the pinkness or not?
Why would this even be up for discussion? You would expect that would be a logical thing to say right off the bat, and that would settle the problem.
I don't know. That's a very good question.
Good, direct response.
Yeah, right. So obviously there was some disagreement about it. There was a disagreement, and they're trying to resolve the disagreement. So the disagreement is, in order to calculate twilight, do I look directly at the sun, or do I look exactly the other way? One rabbi thinks one rabbi thinks the other. They're not comfortable with that disagreement for whatever reason. They want to have one standard. So they come up with, you look at the sunset, which, by the way, seems to make the most sense.
Yeah.
It makes the most sense to me because, it's really the movement of the sun that determines Shabbat.
Sure.
Right. When Shabbat begins, or when festivals begin. So it makes the most sense to me that you're looking at the sun, and as you see the sun setting, and it finally sets, then it's the twilight period's over.
I mean, in the Bible, when they talk about sunset, do they talk about twilight? I mean, they're talking about twilight
right
here.
I don't recall any biblical passages discussing the twilight, even poetically. Like, for instance, this phrase, Ben Hashmashot, which we talked about last time, between the suns. I'm pretty sure that's only Talmudic. I don't think that term appears in the Bible. Now, there may be some poetic references to twilight in the Bible. I'm not personally aware of any. There might be. I haven't memorized the whole thing yet. That's one of my goals later in life.
I mean, sunset is such a clear definition. Why come up with another one?
Why is it? Oh, sunset. But twilight is not such a clear definition.
Right, but why bother with twilight when sunset is such a clear definition?
Well, because the day and night, though, are not clear definitions. So that's what's not clear. So, all you got to do is look outside, in a typical day, and you'll see there's not a clear definition. Oh, now it's nighttime. Oh, it was day. So there seems to be a transition, and they have to figure out what that transition period is because the law could change if it's a transition period. So they're trying to decide, and they're trying to decide how long that transition period is. There is one rabbi that says it doesn't have a definition.
Right.
Well, it's either day or night. But even that guy would have to admit, okay, so then tell me exactly when I know. How do I know that?
Right.
Yeah.
How do we today, we look, it says Shabbat candlelight.
6:42.
such and such time.
Yeah.
How do they figure that
I
time
don't
out?
know. It's a good
You don't
question.
know?
No, I mean there's probably a way to do. There's a way to figure out
but I mean,
exactly when.
it's never-
No, they go by sunset. By sunset.
Is it 18 minutes from sunset? Is that the time?
Before. Yeah. So first of all, they figure out sunset, and presumably there's a way to determine the exact time. Now, of course, even scientists have had to agree. How do we define sunset? I mean, there does have to be some kind of agreement there. So scientists agree, and we listen to their opinions. How do you define sunset? And then so you have a way of doing it. Now we have clocks and measurements of time, so they come up with a measurement of time. And you're right, they add 20 minutes to it, 18 minutes to it, and to make before just to be safe. That's an arbitrary number. That's just to be safe. It could be 40 minutes. It could be 50 minutes. You can light Shabbat candles on Thursday if you want to. You can bring. You just can't do it after Shabbat. So they want to make sure. And the 18 is a good number because it's chai. Yeah. But no, it's totally arbitrary. Also, they just figure let's give the poor Jews because they're going to be late anyway. And they're going to be rushing. Let's give them an extra 18 minutes to get their act together.
So right now we officially say that Shabbat. Right now, we officially say Shabbat starts at sunset.
Yeah, although when you light your candles, that's when Shabbat starts for you. That's what's interesting. It's subjective for you.
Right.
If you light Shabbat candles on Thursday, that's when Shabbat begins. But that's subjective. There's an objective starting of Shabbat at sunset. Yeah.
So we don't even go by the twilight because it's still twilight after sunset.
No, there's not. It's not. So that's how you define sunset.
That's how they.
So there's a definite. They're defining sunset as when that pink is over, and the sky now is just kind of. It's not dark yet, but it's not pink anymore. And that's sunset. That's the Talmudic definition of sunset.
But they use the number of stars.
So that's not twilight anymore. The number of stars is when Shabbat ends. Remember, Shabbat ends an hour after Shabbat starts. It's got to be dark. How do you define dark? You see stars. Well, yes.
Having learned Judaism in a twisted secular sort of way, in the book Twilight, Elie Wiesel says that the rabbis said that it's when you can't tell the difference between green and blue.
Wow.
And I wondered if there's any Talmudic or...
I haven't seen that. That's a nice definition. The only definition I remember from the age of 3 was when stars come out. But, of course, there would be other definitions. You can see there's at least 4 definitions of sunset and of twilight. So, of course, there was other definitions of darkness. So that may be one also. I don't remember that. That's interesting. I forgot there was that book, that Elie Wiesel book, Twilight. I was thinking, of course, the vampire book, Twilight. And we should look at that and see how she defines twilight
I think so.
when the vampires come out.
The big question, of course, is twilight different on a night there's a green flash or not?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Just to pick up on Michael's point, so the written tradition just separates darkness from light, and
Right.
that's all.
Doesn't say sunset.
No.
No.
And the oral tradition, and so the written tradition is God separating darkness and light. And the oral tradition is human endeavor to decide what's morning and what's night. And that's why, that's probably one of the reasons that this is one of the first things that we study in the written tradition, and it parallels very much what the oral tradition is. But it's a human endeavor. And so, once the oral tradition is given, it's like the Oven of Achnai story. Humans, you figure it out. You figure out when morning is. You figure out when night is. And there's all kinds of interesting discussions, including, by the way, the green and the blue,
Is in there somewhere,
which is actually one of the things that in the Israeli army, when they decide when it's time to get out of your hidden caves in the morning, it's all about color definition. So,
That's interesting.
yeah.
All right, we're going to continue.
We live in this fractal
Continuing to... Now we're continuing to argue and to discuss how long twilight is. Rabbi Nechem Omar. So this is Kedei sheyalech Adam meisha tishka hachama chatzi mil. Okay, so this is interesting and also relevant to Harvey's comment. So where a person could walk from sunset. So he's actually saying twilight doesn't start until sunset. So from the time the sun sets, by the time a person could walk half a mile. Okay. Amar Rabbi Chanina. So, and that's Rabbi Chanina says, Harotzeh leda Shiaro shel Rabbi Nechemia. So Rabbi Hanina says, if you want to know how long that is, so I mean, he says it's a time. The time a person can walk half a mile from sunset. If you want to know how that is, Yania Chama Berosh Carmel. So leave the sun, at the top. You see the sun on the top of Mount Carmel. That's a place still today. Obviously, it was written in Israel. V'yered v'yitbol bayam v'ya'aleh, and then descend, and then take a little bath in the sea. It's the sun, actually. So from the time the sun is at the top, when it's setting, when the setting sun is at the top of Mount Carmel, till it's going down to the sea. Zeh shi'aro shel Rabbi Nechemia. So if it's not a person walking, it's actually you watch the sun as it goes from the top of Mount Carmel down to the sea. That's the length of twilight. Is there a question? Yes. Okay. I'm going to keep going. So it's 163. Amar Rabbi Chia. Now, this is almost like jazz improvisation. They just pick up on... Yeah, well, and here they're just picking on, if you want to know what that unit of time is, now we're going to pick up on this, if you want to know, seeming to change the subject, although later they bring it all together. Amar Rabbi Chia. And it's also Rabbi Chia talking again. Haratzeler ot be'erash shel Miriam. If you want to know what the well of Miriam looked like. Or actually literally means if you want to see the well of Miriam. Although I think it means if you want to know. I don't think he's actually going to point to the well of Miriam. But if you want to know what it looked like. What's the well of Miriam? Anybody know? So the well of Miriam is the well of water that accompanied the people in the desert. It was the miraculous well of water. So remember, there's arguments about water for the first 2 years of the journey through the desert, but after that, there's no more arguments. So there's a midrash. It's really a lovely midrash that there was a well of water that followed them that only was there because of the chut, the merit of Miriam. So Miriam's great righteousness allowed for there to be a well of water which kept the people alive, and that well disappeared as soon as Miriam died. So now, and there's a midrash. There's a magical well that accompanied the people all through the desert, and they called it Be'erash shel Miriam, the well of Miriam. If you want to see it, Ya'aleh Rosh Carmel, climb Mount Carmel, v'yitzpeh v'yireh kamin kivra bayam. So climb to Mount Carmel, you'll get a good view, and you'll see a rock formation, and they describe it here as kivara. Kivara is a sieve. Sieve like a cooking sieve, like you sieve flour. You'll see a rock formation there that looks a lot like a sieve, and that's what the well looked like. Or you may be saying that's the well itself, like that's the remnant of the well. Okay, we will stop there.